Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you may happen to be. You have tuned into Talk About Your Community. I'm Todd Nilson, your host with Clocktower Advisors. And on this show, we hear from a variety of people in the community profession, people adjacent to the profession, people who run or are in interesting communities or disciplines that have an impact on what we do. And today I am very happy to have as a guest Rachael Silvano, who is the current community operations manager at Zapier and has been in a variety of community roles over the past 10 years. We're going to be talking a little bit about paths for community professionals as we go. Rachael, welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you here today.
I'm so excited to be here.
Rachael, I gave you sort of a really brief, insufficient introduction. Could you talk a little bit about your journey in community management and what's brought you to the land of Zapier?
Oh, 100%. And it was not straightforward. So in super brief, condensed formatting, I went to school for sociology and theater, and then was doing local community building. I was like programmatic, structured stuff. And then I met somebody who recommended I take on the fellowship at the Community Roundtable, who is, if you listeners aren't familiar, the Community Roundtable is a community for community managers. They've been around for quite some time in the early 2000s and have some of the, really foundational research on the state of communities and the state of community management, careers and compensations. So that's where I started formally, which was a real benefit because I got to see these variety of careers from internal community managers, external community managers, everything in between. From there, I moved into a number of different roles, including some consulting, which I think a lot of community practitioners find themselves doing from time to time. And then ultimately landed here at Zapier, where currently I'm just under my 3-year anniversary. And I now run a community of practice. So one of the things I imagine you and I might talk about is, even though my title at Zapier is community operations manager, which is what I was brought in to do, my day-to-day is really more aligned with community management. I'm the solo community manager currently running the Zapier Wizards Guild, which is a community of practice for AI and automation.
That is so cool. Love the name Wizards Guild. Having evocative names for programs within the community is such an important thing. Helps people to imagine, new futures, new ways of doing things. Inspires them in various ways. And I'm sure, like as a sociologist and as a theater major, that's bringing drama into groups in a good way, helping them to be energized by language and words, such an important thing to be able to do.
I was talking the other day about how fun it was when we were building the Wizards Guild. It was my first time I got to actually work with a brand studio in building the identity of the space, which was really beyond my Canva skills that I'm not very good at. And one of the things I'm most proud of is we worked with an outside illustrator. And then for our super users, I know this is not what we're talking about today, but I love this so much. We made 3D minis of our guild leader. And so we have these for members to hand out as delight and surprise. And the Wizards identity has been such a boon to us. Like, people really like it. Gives you so much to work with in terms of programming fodder and identity, and like coming to the guild and experiencing things. It's really a nice differentiator for us.
That I love that, the idea of having a creative moniker on something that gives you a broad palette to work with for programs, for metaphors, for just ways of making things interesting. Love it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah.
So community operations manager, you said, like, yeah, I'm doing a lot of community management. That's a big part of my day. But and I know that there are people that are, deeply specialized in community ops as a field. But for somebody who's maybe just new to community management as a field, they're contemplating a career, what is it technically that you see a community operations manager doing specific or maybe distinct from community management overall?
It's a great question. When I first came into the Community Roundtable, there was a real clear bifurcation in terms of specialty work that people do. And there was people that were more forward facing, the face of the community, the person leading a lot of calls, being present. And then there was all of the tactics that go behind that and all of the work that happens to make it seem seamless, to make it seem effortless. That, oh my gosh, I was just thinking about that topic and now there's a roundtable on it. I was just wondering that. So that's what the operations manager in my mind does, is all of the background work. Now, sometimes at a small organization, that might be, say, like owning a metrics dashboard and doing some of the analytic sides. Sometimes at a really large organization, it might mean doing operations across, like connecting of, well, we have people in HubSpot and we want to make sure that we're documenting a process from HubSpot to the community and tracking those sort of big tooling ecosystems back and forth. When I also worth noting, when I came into Zapier, my operations role sat on the support community side, which was much more around ticket deflection. And it was a lot of operations in terms of seeing how we could plug in data from the community to the product team and product enablement and make sure those insights got shared. And then there was a change. We had a reduction in force in the support team, and we were moved into now a team that was newly monikered community marketing. And community marketing as a team isn't something I actually had ever worked on, like a team called that or a team that sat under that distinction, but it ended up being really beneficial. So even though my title hasn't changed, the work clearly has. But for someone new coming in, to just answer your question, the operations is all of that technical and the back end style, like knowing the platforms, knowing what talks to what.
I was going to say it sounds pretty technical in nature. So somebody that has a bent towards the platforms and the tooling and the analytics side of things might be a good fit for that. I do want to come back to that point around sort of the pivoting or the adjusting of your roles over time and sort of like how that happened, because I think there is a skill to navigating those changes within an organization and understanding how to pivot yourself and position yourself for new roles that I think is worth helping people who are thinking about their career management, to do a little more consciously or intentionally. But I'll stick a pin in that for a moment. On the technical side of an operations role, I get it. There's a lot of tech, and I have to say, as outgoing and as amazing you are, that feels like a more introverted role for someone. I'm having a hard time seeing you in that as a focus.
It might surprise you. I love the data. I was just talking to someone coming into Zapier saying that the calls are really fun, but I really like answering questions I like getting into the weeds of things. And I've also when I worked at the community roundtable, I did this vendor analysis and I found applying my brain to thinking about how tools want you to use them and versus like how we need them to fit in our ecosystem was a problem that I found really engaging and engrossing, and doing things that you just require that like sitting and working with it. But you bring up a great point, which is the things that give us, that like drain us and energize us as a career sort of gauge, which is something I've thought a lot about. And something that I talk to people, for me personally, is a more senior person. I actually really don't mind monotony, and I don't mind kind of the like same tasks. And that's a huge asset to my team. Sometimes I just don't want to do the sticky data stuff. And I'm like, well, you can hand that to me. I actually find that very peaceful and meditative.
It's a little relaxing to kind of go through. Like, I'm with you. Like, sometimes I feel like people don't want to do something if they feel like it's the least bit tedious. But like, if you just kind of jump in, like one of my mantras has always been, just do the damn thing. If something needs to be done, do it. Just go in and make it happen, because those tedious things are necessary sometimes to make everything run and make it work smoothly. So I'm totally with you. It gets a little meditative as you start getting into something, even if it's a repetitive task. You start to see patterns. You realize things about the community, about how people interact within the space.
Yes.
Yeah, all kinds of insights come out sometimes when you're doing the tedious thing.
100%. And I think that in terms of how I positioned myself in my career, it was really important for me. I always wanted to stay an individual contributor. I don't know if that'll stay true forever, but I always wanted to show up and do my thing. I also always really want to be on the ground. I never wanted to just sit in strategy. I never wanted to be so far removed from the community that I'm just thinking about how it might do. Instead, I really want to be, in the platform, breaking things, fixing things, trying out new things. And that was one of the directions that I was very clear about when I pivoted into the community marketing team, was saying, look, I want to be in it. I don't want to be sitting, far away from this space. I want to be pretty active in working on it.
I appreciate that. And it's one of the things that I always said, like I go to market as a community strategist, but one of the things I've always maintained is that I am a practicing strategist. Like I see very little value in strategy from people that have never actually done the work, that have never gotten their hands dirty. Like even if it's something that I'm not going to necessarily be doing on a day-to-day basis, I need to have tried to do it and gotten my bloody noses and and fallen down, just so that I feel like I can talk about it with some sense of understanding or empathy about the work that's being done. So like, even though like I've never necessarily craved, to be the person that is doing the day-to-day of community management, I have I like to think I've got a real appreciation, for that work of being, as you said, the individual contributor, and really, getting into the nuts and bolts of, how do we do this in this platform? How do we connect this data to the CRM? Like all of that stuff is
Mhm.
super important to get nerdy with over time. Um, so cool. So I was going to ask then. So if someone is interested in that operations, kind of role, is that is it accurate to infer from this that that I would be probably not necessarily interacting a lot day to day with the community members, but am I interacting more with internal teams in that role? Am I more like the internal ambassador to the community, or is that like, if it's a big enough team, is that like the director of community or the head of community that's more responsible for that PR work, that internal PR work for the organization?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a challenging one because it's gonna be so dependent on the organization.
Mhm.
So I have both formally and informally held operations roles, and they've encompassed whatever the community has required. So very often for me, and I don't think this is in the lexicon of somebody that's very formally sitting in an operations like career trajectory, but for me, it's always been the like do what needs doing. And sometimes the do what needs doing is going to be a lot of data management and vendor management and dealing with that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. But sometimes the doing what needs doing is going to be active community management and sitting in the threads and knowing how to for example, one thing that I think if you're in operations, it's important to sit with and to understand is your information architecture and your community taxonomy. That's something that I would, as a community ops person, own because I would want to make sure that fit
Mhm.
in our larger ecosystem and that we're tracking against the right things, that we're not just going all over the place with how people find information. So I think that if somebody's interested in ops, my recommendation isn't to get too caught up in the title and in that role. Like specifically, I would focus more on the, what parts of this job, even though, I think the majority of a role when I see a community manager position is going to have some operations in it. It's just going to exist in nature of the role. So I think it's about like edging out the like, okay, how can I shape this a little bit at a time? And for me, it's a great example of going to Zapier and starting in the operations, but the operations at Zapier are so complex as an automation platform that it ended up being, I really wanted to get back to what I am good at, which is building communities of practice, of building these like very in-depth, engaged, dynamic spaces. And so that was kind of me shifting the little bits of like, okay, I'm going to keep some of the operational background that I have, but apply it to this new space that I now sit in.
I really liked a lot of what you said about the that looking for opportunities to shape the role. Like I like the way you put that, because I think anytime that I've made a successful pivot in my work, and I made a pretty significant one when I pivoted from tech recruiting into community building. That was not necessarily an intuitive flip, for the work that I did, but it was definitely a trajectory I was on, and I was able to make that change or that motion by relating my current experiences and things that I was good at and interested in to the things that I wanted to be doing. Like you shape that role over time. You
Right.
start to shape that work that you do. And so it's not necessarily about like, if you're waiting for a company to decide that they have this open role and that they're going to take applicants for it, you're probably not the person getting into that role. Like they're going to recruit
That's right.
externally, for that role. But I've heard many stories over the years of community professionals like you who've been able to successfully navigate the waters, of a role, and then sort of pick the things that you want to do and really kind of talk to direct, your direct reports, or not your direct reports, but the person you directly report to,
Yeah.
and anyone else that may be influential in the role. And this is probably putting it the wrong way, but sell them on a vision of the good that you could do, by being a little more focused on a new set of responsibilities or some new roles. Wow. If I was in a more dedicated operational role, I could probably get this data and get it to do this thing for you that you've been wanting, for all this time, like helping them to see the upside of it. I'm wondering if you've had some conversations like that in your career where that really worked well for you.
I mean, for me, it's Zapier coming into the community marketing, the newly formed community marketing team was a lot of that. Like, this is what I would advise, and this is what I'd like to see, and this is what I anticipate. There was a bit of culture shock coming in because the attitude, I mean, Zapier support community is a behemoth. I mean, it's
Mhm.
over 500,000 unique visitors a month at times.
It's
It's just
massive.
all it's massive. It's on, it's such this big, heavy community that then to come to a team that was starting from scratch, it was, very scrappy. And the idea of that team was, be quick, fail fast, learn lessons. And the entire time as I was building the community strategy, there was this kind of anxiety of, well, what if, like, what if it doesn't? And my director, Carly Moulton, who is just incredible. This is her first time leading community work. She's a PR and marketing person as a background, but she really listened to when I was saying, look, like this is what we'd get out of if we invested a bit more time, and this is what I think we'll see if we do this type of building. And she really believed in that, which was a real boon for me. I don't think many people get the opportunity to go net new at an organization that frequently, but if I was looking at it back now, I can see the sort of work that I was teeing up to say a community of practice would make a lot of sense. My background is in building these types and working in these types of smaller spaces and building, particularly like cohort based, like, specialized kind of grouping. And if you're not in that title now, it's about like putting out the feelers and seeing like, okay, well, like what would it look like if I did 5% of that work inside my current role and then 10%, that kind of thing.
That's great. I am curious. So you've mentioned community marketing a couple of times. Could you maybe say a little bit more about that as a professional focus as well? Because when I think about community marketing, sometimes I think, oh, do you mean I'm marketing the community externally?
Right.
Or is this internal community marketing like events management or, something to do with the branding of the community itself? Like I am curious about like how Zapier's gone about defining that and looking at that as a team or a role.
I was not part of the decision in making the community marketing team, so I was put into it, and I was very skeptical. And I was like, I don't know, why they put us together. And I was very quickly and successfully sold on it. So community marketing at Zapier, at least, is a trio of three things. It is customer advocacy, online community, and in-person events that are customer meetups.
So it's truly that ecosystem. It's not just the community technology container. It's
No.
the live stuff too, and like all the places where customers happen to be congregating then.
It is the flywheel of like customer story, success, and sharing.
Okay.
And it's doing that through these. Liz Roberts is our community events person who is doing these incredible, scrappy meetups where, we're saying like, hey, who uses Zapier and is in Atlanta? And then we'll get 50 people to show up and, hang out and talk about new Zapier products. And then Miranda Bosher is in customer advocacy, and she's the one who's doing these like formal, like very polished stories and awards. And then I sit in the guild as sort of continuing these conversations around AI and automation. And we all are in this flywheel together. And I've been, I think my initial skepticism of sitting under marketing was like, look, I don't want to just push people into doing the marketing like stuff. I think that's not what community's here for. And I was very pleasantly surprised at how well both our team works and it was formed, but then how sitting under marketing just gets you access to some really cool like stuff. And I really have become a convert to it. I think that I used to view marketing with a high degree of suspicion, and but they really proved that what our internal evangelism is all about, like these are the positive stories that are coming out of how someone's in the guild doing something interesting. How do we highlight that for more internal folks as well as people who are coming across Zapier for the first time?
Yeah, I understand that skepticism of the marketing world. Yeah, it's funny. I'm reading a book now by Derek Weeks, the CMO, who wrote Unfair Mindshare, which is about that relationship between marketing and community. And he kind of frames it like with like three different. This is not a product endorsement. I don't know Derek that well. I just like his book and I happen to be reading right now to relate this. But he talks about sort of that relationship between marketing and community is like there's these three orbits. There's the product itself as the first orbit. The second orbit is the brand and the brand stories. And marketing tends to live in those worlds quite a bit. And a tendency can tend to be on acquisition and sort of that conversion and selling people on the story of the organization. But he contends that the third orbit is really community, which is not about the company name, not about the product, but about the space and like the problems that are being sold. What is the core of that? What do I get? What are the feelings I get? What are the benefits I get of using these products or being involved with this company? It's the reason that I'm a fan of that brand in the first place. But community is not really, or has not traditionally been comfortable selling those products or those like anytime sales comes anywhere near communities, a lot of community managers throw their arms up in the air and run away screaming that they worry about that. But his contention has been that it's you gain so much by having an empowered community. I know I don't need to convince you of this, but by having that empowered community that you can understand what the broader customer base thinks or feels about automation, in your case, and it's a way to convene conversations in a non-threatening, non-salesy, kind of way, to do it. But if product marketing, product ideation teams are actively involved and watching the communities, it can be a very successful relationship. At the end of the day.
I think so. And I think that one of the things I've never given up as a community practitioner is putting members' needs, values, and interests first and foremost. So I think there's still an authenticity to, look, if you're struggling with part of a Zap, like I want to hear about it. And I want to get you in touch with the right folks to help fix it. Or Zapier had pricing and packaging changes, and some people were, like there's a authenticness to saying like, look, like you're not being, like you won't be banned if you say something negative. You won't be banned if you're just talking about automation in general, which we have a lot of competitors. But the benefits of saying, look, we're gonna the tide rises all ships in this case, where if you're sharing a story that's interesting and valuable to both members and to Zapier, that's quite a large overlap that we can sit in and is really beneficial. And there's been some really great case studies, very early days from the Wizards Guild, of people coming and sharing just with our community members. And then our CEO watches it, and then they get invited to a roundtable, and then they get invited to a conference. Like there's just this really big echo effect that can happen when somebody's interested and passionate about using these tools. And that we as Zapier can be like on the level, like my only place is this space with you. So like you are contacting and talking to someone who's here instead of going through a potentially frustrating experience if you're in a queue and you're waiting to hear from somebody in support because you have friction with the product, which, is unfortunately the case sometimes too.
Right. Back to the career management element of this work. You mentioned earlier, like you're happy for now being a practitioner, in the trenches, person. As you sort of think about that, sort of the next career level up, like if you were to progress traditionally into more of a managerial level role, what do you think are some things someone would need to think about if they were going to step into like a director of community title or chief community officer, kind of role? Or do you think that's not even really there yet, for most organizations? Not to make that a leading question, but I think it's something that's been on my mind quite a bit over the past year.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Brian Obliger and Erica Cools and Before the Lock episode where they talked about management and the step up. And one of the things they mentioned is, don't do it unless you're really compelled to. And I've always taken that pretty seriously, but I'm also very stymied by my own growth as somebody who's been now quite experienced and trying to find contentment with what it looks like to be adequately titled and senior and keep being an individual contributor, which has, it has a ceiling. It just naturally would. I don't personally aspire to be a director of community. For me, I think ideally sitting as a, is a senior community consult in an organization where I'm really informing an ecosystem, and maybe that involves having direct reports. And I'm sure that's a skill set that I often mentor a lot. I really do enjoy, and that's what I would advise people who are thinking about managing. And I'm in these talks pretty actively around, you're a really good mentor to other people who are working in community, and so you should consider that application as like management. There's a lot of management things that, like, again, I personally, enjoy being a little less on the hook for things and a little more independent. But I would also say that as I move through the community world and as I sit in my space and I think about what's next, very often I think about how does the more senior you get, the more you're anticipated to own the ecosystem outside of you. So if I was to become the next level at Zapier, it's no longer just that Rachael owns the guild, it's that Rachael is the person for community across the entire organization. So when someone's doing a new community, they come to me. When someone's looking for best practices, they come to me. And so some of that work I'm doing sort of softly now and testing the waters and saying, what does it look like to sit? There's a huge runway of like where community can go at Zapier. And so it's sort of like I'm very much waiting and watching, and I'm very happy. Like, again, I'm just so chuffed. I got put on a team that was just like custom built for me. And that was the last thing I guess I'll say on the matter is that I appraise very often the hedonic treadmill of like, do I need to progress? Like, is like what's important for me about the next level? And for me at Zapier, I feel very consistently challenged in a meaningful way. I really like the culture internally for me and my team. And so there's sometimes a little bit of like, I think, if I've been here for 3 years and I haven't had a title change, and that's been fine. I've been like, okay, like someone might argue that I really don't do operations work. And I'd be like, no, you're probably right about that. But it doesn't bother me. Like internal politics are going to take a minute to probably update that title. And I'm like, all right, they'll probably I'll be a community manager again. Like, that's fine.
Well, I think there's an important nugget here for people thinking about managing their own careers and how they think about them, and that is that you are so in tuned with what brings you joy and what you like to do, and I think that's something important to self-assess. It's not about that there is a path, to follow. There is no path. There is no map. Just like Shakespeare wrote, the course of true love did never run smooth. Neither do our careers. There's a lot of side quests. There are a lot of interesting, things that can happen to us along the way. And part of it is just being open to opportunity and seeing things as they happen, and picking up that little bit of experience over here and that little bit of experience over there. And the next thing you know, you've built the next step in the path forward, to move. And I think your journey itself is so inspiring, and I think that this will help. I think many people, as they come across this, and play it on YouTube. Hello, YouTube. We'll get an opportunity to maybe have some further conversations about this as a topic, going forward. Rachael, thank you so much, for all of the insights and the energy and the inspiration you give. Zapier is very lucky to have you there. And anything you're working on now that you're particularly excited about that you wanna shout from the rooftops?
I do. We have some members that are the coolest people on the face of the planet. And when you're talking in a community that's doing AI, you get people that are doing things that just amaze me. So the thing that I'm very jazzed about that I'm doing now in the guild and getting ready to deploy is doing AI assisted sorting houses for new members. So thinking about how do you come into a community, and based on questions that you answer, and for lack of more technical terms, vibes you give off, putting you into a school of wizardry.
No way.
That,
This is like the sorting hat from Harry Potter. That's so cool. I love it.
I feel like for legal reasons, I'm not allowed to call it that, but like I
You won't
have a
call it
little
that, right?
sorting hat. Legally distinct hat of sorting. But that is something that I'm super just like coming in every day and thinking about and getting that built up. So that is something that as I keep working on that, I would love to come back and be like, oh gosh, Todd, like the last year the cohorts were so cool and people loved it and it was so great.
Let's absolutely come back to that as its own topic, because I think that there's a whole conversation around building advocacy groups and the storytelling we do around that. And it sounds like the Wizards Guild is doing some super cool things. I would love to hear more about that soon. Rachael,
Yeah.
thanks again for being on the show. I truly appreciate you and the work that you do. And for those of you who are tuning in on this, as always, we really appreciate it if you comment, like, and share. Commenting and sharing is more important than liking, although we love the likes. We don't turn those away. They're lovely too. Really appreciate that. And if you have a community conundrum that you're dealing with, thinking about your community career, would love to hear about that in the comments. In particular, how are you managing your career? Give us your tips. Give us your ideas. Rachael and I will be watching. And in the meantime, keep building great communities out there, everybody. Have a great day.